All right, everybody, welcome to another edition. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us last week. Last week I spoke with Arthur Staple, Andrew Gross, and Brian Compton talking Isles. This week we're going to talk Isles, some Rangers, and the NHL as a whole. This week I have some really great guests as well. Mollie Walker from the New York Post, Scott Charles from Pro Hockey Talk. He also covers the Islanders and Rangers for the Associated Press, and Joe Pantorno, who is the sports editor for AM New York Metro, if I'm not mistaken. Is that how I say it correctly?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. It's good to see all of you. I haven't seen anyone in a long time, obviously, with everything going on. And surprisingly, a lot to talk about when it comes to hockey. Obviously, the big thing off the bat is what Matt Zuccarello said about Henrik Lundqvist and the New York Rangers the other day. Told it to a Norwegian outlet and picked up and translated by SNY, and some other outlets have picked it up. But obviously not a great look for the Rangers, not a great look for Matt Zuccarello, too, when it comes to his feelings about how he was treated, how Henrik Lundqvist was treated. And Molly, we were just talking about this before we jumped on. Certainly not a great situation for anyone right now.
No, definitely not. And like I just said before, it's also in the same breath as everything that's going on with Leos Anderson, everything that's come out with him and his displeasure with the organization as well. So it's definitely been a couple back-to-back hits for the Rangers organizations from a player's standpoint. But I mean, everybody took Matt Zuccarello's trade very, very hard, from the fans to the coaching staff and the players, obviously. I don't think I've ever gotten so emotional watching Henrik Lundqvist talk about it. Do you guys remember that video? Him fighting back the tears. That was just terrible. So I mean, everybody knows that Mats and Hank are best friends. So I guess, watching Hank kind of get edged out here after everything he's done for the organization, I guess Mats just couldn't hold his tongue.
Yeah, it certainly seemed like that. And Joe, when you look at what's kind of been going on with the Rangers as a whole in this situation, obviously Molly mentioned Anderson as well. I mean, with the way that Lundqvist has had this situation play out, there was a lot of feeling that, he wanted to be a Ranger, he wanted to be here, and things have soured pretty quickly with the Shesterkin coming in and Georgiev coming in and him kind of being cast aside. I mean, this kind of feel like maybe this is also what Hank is feeling without Hank actually having to say anything?
Yeah, that's an understandable way to put it. And it makes sense. I mean, Hank's been nothing short of a loyal soldier since 2005, and he's the franchise's all-time greatest goaltender. And really, it was always a matter of time when the Rangers were going to get this guy a cup and when it would happen, how glorious it would be for them. And the fact that I think everybody is facing that harsh reality that, hey, you know what, it's not going to happen, and it's definitely not going to happen with the Rangers. It's a tough pill to swallow, and I'm sure Hank has to come to terms with his hockey mortality of sorts. But this is a situation where, a guy like David Quinn, he isn't put in a good situation, obviously, where he has to play the bad guy, and he's supposed to juggle three goalies at the same time. So it's really a difficult situation and such a tough way for a stand-up guy and a all-time great to kind of go out on. And hopefully both sides can kind of salvage this relationship and it doesn't get any more petty than this.
Yeah, Scott, you've covered the Islanders a lot over the last couple of years as well. I mean, we've all been there a little bit, but we've certainly seen how well three goaltenders work at the NHL level. And this season kind of seems to reinforce that it just doesn't. And unfortunately for Hank, he's kind of been caught in here. When it comes to his stance now on still wanting to be a Ranger, still wanting to be here, and obviously his legacy with the Rangers, how do you think this all plays out? Kind of how this whole situation has kind of shoved him to the side almost.
Well, it's a tough situation, especially because he has a no trade clause. If he says that he wants a trade, like how many teams are really in the market for an $8.5 million goaltender?
Yeah.
So now if he says he wants a trade and the Rangers can't trade him, that's like the worst situation in this. I think it's kind of something that you just got to ride out his contract right now, unless you really want to do him a favor and entertain the idea of buying him out. If there's something that happens with the CBA and an amnesty buyout that could resolve this situation, and he could be a likely candidate for that. But, sports is a ruthless business. We saw a lot of players get pushed out. Patrick Ewing with the Knicks, you're seeing the very beginning of Aaron Rodgers with the Packers.
Yep.
But Lundqvist, the truth is, Shesterkin's been unbelievable this season. He came up and he was great. Georgiev has earned himself a role. Like Lundqvist has played, and he hasn't played at his peak, and that's a problem when you're fighting for your job.
Do you think, Scott, I'll stick with you here for a sec. Do you think that the Rangers anticipated that Shesterkin and Georgiev kind of would be where they were at this point when the season paused? Because obviously both were playing really well and both kind of surprised a lot of people. I think maybe some thought that Shesterkin was going to be good at some point, but not this soon. Do you think that kind of caught the Rangers a little off guard as well? Because they seemed, I don't want to say unprepared, but it was a bit of a surprise even to them.
Well, I think Shesterkin's emergence really changed the equation. The fact that he pushed the envelope and had to get playing time in the NHL now is really the difference in all of this. If this happened next year in the final year of his contract, that changes the whole equation, right? But now this is a problem that you have to deal with for a year and a half, and hopefully a year and a half, because hopefully the NHL returns next season on time. But that's it's going to be that's the issue right there. So I think his emergence really changed everything.
And obviously, Mollie, you kind of mentioned before, Zuccarello wasn't thrilled with the situation that he had when he was traded, and the kind of the lack of loyalty, I guess you would call it here. Is this something that maybe stands out in the future for other players when they're thinking about the New York Rangers, even when guys go to look and re-sign, or is this kind of a wake-up call to some guys, maybe, or a reminder that, hey, this is, like Scott was saying, this is a business. They don't, it's nothing personal. It's just, it is what it is.
I definitely think they all know it's a business. I think that, I mean, as tough as it is to watch unfold, they all are very understanding that this is just how it goes, including Lundqvist. Like Joe said, he's been a professional up and down the board his entire career. So there's no doubt that when push comes to shove, when those interviews happen, he's going to say, like, it's a business, I guarantee you that's what he's going to point to. I would also like to add that I see the other side of the Igor and the Georgiev situation. I think that Georgiev was on his way out. I think they were planning on it, and then he was the one that they were like, we just can't. We just can't give him up. I thought I was waiting for it, honestly. I thought Georgiev was gonna be pretty big trade bait, but I think that toward the end there, he just, like Scott said, they both just gave the Rangers absolutely no reason not to know that they're the number one and number two.
Yeah, and it's interesting turn of events there too for the Rangers. And as they were coming to a pause here with everything that's been going on in the outside world with the COVID-19 pandemic, the Rangers were making that push to the playoffs, and obviously a big part of that had been Shesterkin and the player Georgiev, Joe, where that kind of changed things a lot for the Rangers, and their play picked up. And coming out of this pause, if we do ever come out of this pause, Joe, how big now does that become for Shesterkin and Georgiev to kind of carry this team once things get going again?
Yeah, it's vital, really. It's going to be difficult for teams to try and pick up this momentum should we come out of the break and kind of jump into a stretch run or straight into the postseason, however it happens. It's no secret that the Rangers' defense has struggled, and they've shown plenty of signs of bending, and at times they have broken. But really, if the Rangers kind of want to hit the ground running here this year, I mean, you need Shesterkin to play the way he did his first 10 games, the first 10 games of his debut. And really, that broken rib kind of threw a wrench into plans and halted things with that car accident and everything. And I think that also played a reason why they really couldn't let either of them go, around that time. But, it's really the guys in the crease for the Rangers are the vital end-all, be-all last line of defense where they have to be on their stand on their heads night in and night out. And, you can hope every night and come in with the formula that they can outscore teams. They have the offense to do so, but both these guys, they got to be it for them. Really, it's a three-man show with Panarin and the two goalies.
Just a reminder, we're taking questions on the Twitter live stream. If you're watching there, we did just have one about the crosstown rivalry that will become Ilya Sorokin if and when it seems like that's most likely going to happen in the next few days once his contract with his KHL club is out. It comes to an end. It will be a New York Islander. You have two guys, Igor Shesterkin, obviously apparently pretty good friends with Sorokin as well, and creates kind of a very interesting addition to the crosstown rivalry. Joe, how much more exciting is that when you talk about Islander Rangers?
Yeah, I mean, this is the day that all Islanders fans have been waiting for. He's kind of been the that Loch Ness monster where does he exist or does he not? And finally they get some good news in finding out that he's on his way to North America and that he'll join the team soon, excuse me. But really the Islanders have lacked consistency when it comes to their netminders in terms of a long-term scale. You look at Rick DiPietro, and it's hard to really label this guy's success. Yes, he spent 11 years with the organization, but the injuries and everything and that massive contract, it left such a bitter taste in the mouth of everybody around the organization. But the Islanders haven't had a starting goalie, besides DiPietro, really stay in that regularly since Kelly Rudy, since he spent 6 seasons with the team in the mid 80s to the late 80s. So Sorokin kind of adds that promise that, hey, you know what, we might have a steady presence in the net for years to come, something like what the Rangers have had with Henrik Lundqvist, and something that I think the Rangers are expecting with Shesterkin. So it can add such a different degree to this rivalry where, it's not often that both the Islanders and Rangers are good, especially over the past 2 or 3 decades. And the rivalry can really come to a head with both goalies kind of headlining this debate: who's better, who's the best goalie, and it's going to be a focal point for years to come, hopefully.
Scott, I want to ask you this too, because like I said, Scott also has worked with me at Islanders Insight in the past as well. Scott's been around the Islanders for a long time. If I told you that Ilya Sorokin was almost guaranteed at this point to come in 2020, would you have put a bet on that, or would you have said you're crazy 2 years ago?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of players dream of coming to the NHL and playing against the best competition. He was kind of stuck in a tight spot, like the pull of the Russian national team and playing for the big team there. I get how there's like an allegiance to that and how you grow up in Russia dreaming of playing for that rather than the Islanders per se. But, with Shesterkin too, like, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Like, Shesterkin's played 12 games. Sorokin's really a myth. Like, let's see how this works out and see if they could really translate to the NHL.
Come
Scott,
on, give the fans what they want.
I always appreciate the fact Scott brings everyone back down to earth rather quickly. But coming back to the Rangers, because I do want to kind of continue on that path for a few more minutes here. We were talking about with the season eventually or hopefully unpausing here. The Rangers, obviously, goaltending is going to be such a huge thing. It was a big thing that carried them going into that situation where the season was put on pause. But Mollie, aside from goaltending now, what does it come down to for the New York Rangers that they need to have really going for them once the season restarts so that they can make that push? I mean, they're a couple points out of a playoff spot, and they are, breathing right down the Islanders' neck as well. So, I mean, what's going to have to happen now for them to be successful and to kind of surprise everyone and make a playoff spot?
I think it's getting rid of those young mistakes once and for all. I feel like in the beginning, it was, during I almost said spring training, general assignment. During training camp, it was a lot of new faces, and it was all going to be about putting the product on the ice and meshing it together. And it was always going to take time. Nobody knows how much time it was going to take. And I definitely think it took people by surprise how quickly they were able to all come together. And I think that was a lot of different things, from Shesterkin coming up to signing Chris Kreider to that extension. There were a lot of different momentum factors that really were just converging at the right time for the Rangers, right when everything went to a pause. So I'm a huge believer in momentum. I'm a huge believer in just feeding the fire. And I honestly feel like that's what alleviated them past expectations, I guess you could say. So I think that should the season resume, it'll be crucial for them to be able to get their legs underneath them as quickly as they possibly can, which is going to be an obstacle for everybody. But it's also going to be about playing the mature hockey that they were starting to really perfect, I guess, toward the end there.
You mentioned kind of everyone needing to get their legs under them. And the one thing that maybe everybody kind of has a disadvantage at, or maybe an advantage at coming back, is that nobody has skated. And it's been such a interesting way to watch how this is all played out. The NBA was targeting May 1st as their potential date to reopen their training facilities. Now that's not happening. They pushed it back to May 8th. And now you look at the NHL, which is always a league that seems to follow the NBA. And, there seems to be some momentum, some at least internal optimism that maybe there's a season going to happen. Maybe they can get training camps going June at some point and then get a season going in July. When it comes to this scenario, let's play this scenario out this is what happens. The season starts back in July. We finish off the regular season in some kind of condensed way where you have 4 hub cities that these teams are playing in. For the Islanders and Rangers, who's the team, I guess, in the scenario that benefits, and is there a team that doesn't benefit? Or is this maybe a possibility where both teams kind of have the advantage, where the Islanders were struggling a bit, they were unhealthy, the Rangers, Shesterkin will be back, kind of 100% now. He's had time to heal up from the rib injury. And you have a team that's kind of on the same footing as everyone. Joe, do you think that when you look at the way the season could come back, is this a good thing or a bad thing for both the New York hockey teams?
Well, see, I actually would say this is more of a split answer.
Okay.
I think for the Rangers, this is a little bit more of a tougher draw for them because they were kind of slacking right before everything kind of froze. But before that, they had a really decent amount of momentum. They seemed to certainly be hitting the stride of sorts. Panarin was playing out of this world, and then all of a sudden they have to come back and they have to magically regain this. And obviously a lot of teams are going to contend with this. But when it's a young team like this who really have never experienced, playing so much, then a layoff, and now you're coming back quickly into a playoff race, it's almost unprecedented. And really the style that the Rangers play and kind of what they hang their hat on in terms of success, that's going to be tough for them. For the Islanders, again, and I really don't want this to come out the wrong way because obviously what's going on around the world is absolutely terrible, but really what happened, play being stopped actually came at a pretty good time for them just because they were, nothing was really going right for them. Injuries were one thing, but when you come back from a break, for an Islanders game plan, it really doesn't get much more elementary than this defense first, batten down the hatches, kind of get teams on the counter. Really, if there's a style of play that can succeed when you're just hitting the ground running, coming off a break, this is it. And really, with this break, and you're coming back in July, then all of a sudden maybe Adam Pelech is ready to come back, and the defense is back to full strength. And then who knows, a couple of things start bouncing your way, and suddenly the Islanders are a problem in the Eastern Conference rather than being a doormat for really what was a nice 2-month stretch for them. So,
Mollie, what about you? You kind of agree with Joe here, or is there maybe a different take on this for both these teams?
No, I definitely think, especially in the Islanders conversation, I think that they were taking a beating and also a depleted roster.
Yes.
Especially, even though it wasn't going to be that long of an injury, but Johnny Boychuk, that was, that happened, took him out for a couple games. Casey Zizekas, his leg laceration was going way longer than they thought it was going to be. Cal Clutterbuck came back, but he was still trying to get his footing. So, it was probably, and I remember speaking to him in the locker room, and he was very shaken up after his injury, extremely, extremely shaken up by it, and was very candid about it too. So I almost feel like the time away from the ice will benefit him as well, even though he was playing. But definitely, I mean, especially like Joe said, if they were able to return and Adam Pelech was ready to play, that would be monumental for them, truly monumental. And I also think, like I said about my momentum belief, absolutely momentum shifting for them. So I definitely think that they were very disappointed about how things were going for them toward the end there. So if play were to resume and they were at full strength, they're coming out guns a-blazing, I would say.
I think most of the players would agree with that. Anders Lee was on the Zoom conference call with the media back when everything first started, and he even said as much. He was trying to kind of do what Joe did, and that was make sure that he clarifies that he doesn't mean that he's happy with what's going on in the world, but obviously the fact that the Islanders get a little of a break here, the injuries, Adam Pelech, who's become such a huge part of that roster on the blue line, could likely be healthy when we get back to the regular season. And you have all those other injuries coming back from that could be healthy for the regular season. But Scott, I'm going to give you a chance to rain on everyone's parade here. When it comes to the Islanders and Rangers coming back from the pause, do they benefit or does this hurt the momentum for either of these teams if and when the regular season restarts and we get into the playoff hunt?
Yeah, well, just to stick on theme, I do think the Pelech injury, he's not coming back so quickly. And I think if things were normal, the start of next season would still be a question mark for him.
Right.
That Achilles injury is always really tricky. Obviously, what Joe and Mollie said about the Islanders, I think is very true. But this is going to be a race to who can get to their system and playing their peak performance first. And the Islanders have a very disciplined structure that they work really well in, and they understand their roles, and that's going to help them a lot. The Rangers have some star power up front now with Panarin and Zibanejad. If you get the right person hot, yeah, that could carry you through a series depending on where we are. So I don't think this hurts, but I think every team will have similar challenges, right? A lot of people will be healthy, a lot of players coming back, and how do we get back to playing our best hockey that you usually have a 5-month stretch to get to this point in the season. Now you have a 2 to 4 week stretch to hit the playoffs, and that's going to be an interesting challenge across the board.
Yeah, it certainly will be. And I mean, not even just what happens with the format for the potential playoffs, for the potential return of the regular season. Scott, I'll stick with you here. As far as the return to the league goes, obviously there's been a lot of chatter. The main thing we're hearing a lot right now is the fact that they're looking into a 4-hub situation where you kind of have the teams kind of separated by division. You know, one division plays in, let's say, Raleigh or Columbus or something like that, and another division plays over here. In your opinion, how is this going to play out? Do you see that coming to fruition, or is the optimism maybe people just being a little too optimistic at this point that things maybe won't work out in the situation where things are so fluid and everything seems to change day by day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough to imagine a world where sports is going to come back in that sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
One negative test could derail the whole plan that they put in place. I'd love it to come back, but the bigger factor for the NHL is, and this is a challenge they have and baseball has, ticket revenue and gate revenue is so important to the finances of the league. If you're playing in front of empty arenas, does that even work financially? Are you really
Right.
covering up? Are you really hitting your objectives that you need to make this work? Like the NFL, they make enough in television rights that they're going to be just fine. Like they
Right.
can register to one area and do it. But for the NHL, that's a real problem. And I don't think that this plan with no fans, are you really generating enough to make this worth it? And I don't think that will happen.
I mean, maybe the one counterpoint to that would be people are so hungry for sports right now on television. Maybe that propels any league that comes back at this point into having a little bit more of an opportunity there when it comes to television rights or when it comes to viewership number. Molly, do you kind of have a thought on that idea, or is it kind of what Scott was saying?
I mean, I think it's wishful thinking. I really would like to think so. I think it's all wishful thinking. If I was a betting woman, and I'm not, I would say that I don't think anything is going to be able to finish out or get going anytime soon, because like Scott said, one positive test and the whole thing is everything's done. All the work that everybody is going
Right.
to have to do to put this all together, gone in one positive test. So, I mean, I also, my biggest point, when people ask me about like the remote locations, is ripping away the players from their families during
Right.
time. I mean, and everybody, and then you have the fans that are like, it's their job, like they have to, like, you know, it's a business, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, these are very unprecedented times where there are a lot of people dying, very unfortunately, and nobody wants to leave their family's side right now. God forbid somebody gets sick. Like, what do you do if a player's family member gets sick? Are you really going to tell him he can't go home,
Right.
or like, you know, can't do anything to help? So I think that's a huge factor in my mind too, that a lot of people aren't thinking about, is that if they're going to present this idea that all players are going to have to move out to Arizona for 4 months or so,
Yeah.
that might not fly.
Scott, I think you want to jump back in here.
Yeah, just one other thing. Like, what happens if there was a false positive test? Say this was like this all worked, and like, you know, the Rangers are playing for their spot in the playoffs, and Zibanejad's tested positive, and they find out 2 days later that it was false. Like, there's that part of the equation, but also the ethical part of society. Like, are we really in a place where we can give thousands and thousands of tests to NHL players where, you know, any given person can't get a test?
Yeah, that's certainly something that even last week when I was talking with B Comp and Arthur and Andrew, it was kind of the same idea. How do you justify giving athletes tests in the name of playing a sport when even the normal person can't get a test without jumping through hoops? And even the other day, we heard a report that the AHL is likely going to cancel their regular season as well, and kind of just try and focus on getting the 2020-21 season going next year. So the NHL is in an interesting position too, Joe. I mean, how do you, I guess, in this situation, if I said, Joe, you're commissioner of the NHL, this decision's now in your hands, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but Joe, what is your thought process here when you're the one in charge and having to make that decision?
I think Molly and Scott really touched on it well here. It's imperative that we get this right in terms of we're dealing with people's lives here, not people's livelihoods, but people's lives. And really, at the end of the day, priority number one is the health and safety of not just the players and the personnel, but everybody here. And I think what really needs to be said, and unfortunately, I think we've been lacking transparency from the very top of our leaders here, and that's for another day in terms of politics.
I was about to say, watch where you're treading.
Yeah, geez.
That's dangerous. I'm walking on eggshells here. But really, we're flying blind here. We're flying blind, and really none of us know how this is going to play out. Nobody knows really what things are going to look like in a month, in 2 months, in 6 months. I know I won't feel comfortable until there's a vaccine, which we already know is going to be in a year or 14 months. We really don't know. So, it's going to be a hard pill for people to swallow, but sometimes you kind of have to come to the realization that, hey, you know what, this isn't going to be some storybook fairy tale. And,
right.
You know what, we might not have sports for a little while, which, is going to be tough, especially, for folks like us and for, fans who kind of rely on it to get through the day. But, we're talking about saving lives here. And, that's the greatest good that we can possibly contend with. So that's all I could really say about that.
You guys were talking about the impact it would have the players on leaving their families for a long extended period of time and having to live out of these cities. Now, the flip side of that too, it seems that part of the draw of trying to get the league going again, not only is because there's a lot of money to be made and a lot of money to be lost by not playing the rest of the regular season and the Stanley Cup playoffs, but you also have the kind of the drive of the athletes that want to play. They, especially if you're a team in a playoff spot already or fighting for a playoff spot, you want to finish it out and you want to compete for the Stanley Cup. I can't imagine how hard, how big that drive is. I'm not an athlete. I mean, outside of Scott, who is a D3 golfer here, I'm not sure any of us were really athletes at such a high level.
Not past high school, Christian.
But how much do you think that drive is impacting this decision as well, or this kind of continued push to we're still having this conversation of where there was a thought of still trying to play this regular season, Molly?
I think the drive will always be there. I think that I'll say Gary Bettman in a interview with Mike Tirico on NBCSN said that a huge thing that he's focusing on is fairness, because no matter what, all the teams that are on the bubble are going to say that they felt that if they were able to play their last 12 to 14 games of the season, they would have been able to get into the playoffs. So it's a huge challenge for Gary Bettman to whatever he does, it has to be done fairly. Mm-hmm. So I think that I don't think it's a question of drive. It's a question of whether or not they're able to create some solution that's fair for everybody. Because I think that even a small, minor setback or disadvantage that a team feels like they're getting, they're going to voice that opinion. Sure. And then that's a bunch of chaos. That's a whole different can of worms. So it's a huge, huge challenge to get it right and make sure it's fair at the same time. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge of this whole thing, rather than players are always going to want to play, but whether or not they feel like they're being treated fairly, that's what we'll see.
It certainly is. It's an interesting thought of how this plays out. Scott, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think the drive is more on a micro level. Like someone like Zdeno Chara, who maybe is in his last season, and he was in position to win the cup. He's probably chomping at the bit. Hopefully he comes back because it's fun to see him play. But regardless of that, they're just not coming back anytime soon. And I think the faster we get that, we understand that, then we're in a better position. I understand the league's position. There's no reason for the league to jump at a conclusion right now, but we know that it's not coming back in the near future.
I agree.
I can always count on you to rain on everyone's parade. Joe, I'll give you a chance to jump in here. What do you think?
Yeah, really, in the grand scheme of things, the drive is almost trivial.
Okay.
Obviously, it puts Bettman in a difficult situation, and where he's probably in the mindset where, okay, whatever decision I make, it's not going to be right, to somebody or to some large faction of people. So, really, it's just taking a step back and almost putting the game, you know, in a secondary setting or on the
Right.
back burner.
Right.
Get it right and keep everybody safe.
Yeah, I mean, there's a crowd of fans that boo Gary Bettman every year because they think he hates their team. So it's a fair point, you guys. When you talk about Scott made an interesting point, and I kind of didn't think of it either, about some of the older guys who this impacts, where maybe they have more of a push to want to try and get the season going. I want to kind of transition though into the off season, and one of the things we always see in the off season or towards the end of the off season is college and junior players making those decisions to jump into the pro ranks, whether that's signing a contract with the team's minor league affiliate, or actually signing a contract with the NHL club. Mollie, you actually did a story the other day on it was a New York Ranger, Morgan Barron, whose decision's kind of been complicated to play college hockey or make the leap to the professional ranks with one of the Rangers minor league affiliates. And it's something I never really thought of when everyone talks about what's been going on, is the decision or the impact that has on that decision. Because when you talk about the drive that some of these guys have, it's also, winning a CHL championship or winning a national title with their respective college clubs. And I thought it was kind of a fascinating look at the mindset of a young player who is not an NHLer, but certainly being impacted by everything that's going on with the season pause and obviously the stoppage of play with the NCAA.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Morgan I think he said, I can't believe I didn't get to play for a national championship at least 5 times during our interview. He was a junior, so he had been there for 3 years, and this was their year. It really was. It was looking like it. They were on a 9-0-0 streak going into the pause, and they were going to make their first Frozen Four in years, and it would have been their first national championship in 50 years if they got there. So, and like I said before, every single player and team is going to say that they thought that they would be able to do it. So in this kid's mind, the rug was ripped out from underneath him as he's about to go play for a national championship, basically. So I definitely think that this is going to impact his decision a lot. I was under the impression during our conversation that he just was in disbelief that he wasn't able to finish out this season. So I think not having that closure, if it really means that much to him, which to any athlete, of course it does, he totally could make the decision to go back because he feels like he needs to just make one more run at a national championship. Just having that closure, even if you don't win, or even if you fall short, even if they didn't make it to the Frozen Four, just knowing that he did it, that he did it, did his best to finish it off and then go to the NHL. But he definitely was very, very distraught over it. And he said that a lot of thought was going to go into it, including the normal things like if he feels ready and stuff like that. But he said, but again, I came to Cornell to win a national championship and I didn't get to do that. So, I really, if I were to see that he announced that he was going back to Cornell, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest. But that's not to say that he wouldn't want to make the jump, but we'll see.
It's certainly interesting. Like I said, I had never thought of the impact on that aspect of the game. Those guys who, I mean, whether it's, D1, D2, or D3, those guys, then they play, college sports, college hockey. Their dream is to win a national title. That's, that's always on the cusp of their mind. So I certainly understand that.
Yeah, and I was really under the impression from when I talked to Chris Jury of the Rangers assistant GM, he said that they think he's ready. So this is really his decision. They're ready for him if he wants to come is the impression that I got, but he's a little rocky there. I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see how much that impacts other players as well. But, sticking with some of the off-season topics, obviously the draft, which, would have been the end of June. There's been a lot of chatter of this year, them potentially, if there's an NHL season again, we don't know what's going to happen, with them possibly doing the draft when they were planning to do it and doing the regular season after it. Again, kind of playing out the scenario where best case, the NHL resumes in July, but they host the draft in June. I mean, Joe, how weird and how complicated does that make everything when it comes to teams figuring out where they're selecting, first of all, and then second of all, just the logistics of everything.
Right. It's going to be extremely weird, hypothetically, and also it's going to be nonsensical because how can you have a draft and then you're going to have teams competing for playoff spots or for, or they're already in the playoffs. So really it's just going to be, again, I said it, it's just going to be weird. But also to play devil's advocate, I mean, again, best case scenario, hockey's able to come back. Could you imagine the day that the NHL could possibly schedule where, they could have the first round of the draft leading into something like either a late regular season playoff, a late regular season game with playoff connotations, or even a playoff game? I mean, that would be a massive day for them. But again, there's going to be a lot of moving parts, and I feel bad for the person who's going to be responsible for putting that all together.
Yeah, it certainly complicates things too when you think about the fact that there are picks and trades that have happened where there are conditions on some of those trades where they've traded draft picks and they're contingent on team X doing X, Y, or Z, and now we have no idea if X, Y, and Z is going to happen. Scott, I mean, how much more does that complicate? Everything obviously else going on, just trying to find the positioning. I mean, that just adds a whole other wrinkle to it.
Well, there's a lot of wrinkles to this, but also, think about a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning. They were going to be defined on their postseason results this year. That if they got swept in the first round again, John Cooper could have been fired. They could have laid the groundwork at the draft for a blockbuster trade that they want to reset their franchise a little bit and take another run. Their whole season is kind of wasted right now because that was where they were going to define their outcome. I wrote about that on NBC a few weeks back, but the complications with the draft order, draft picks, conditional picks, those are all, that's one set of complications, but how a team evaluates themselves is another set of problems. And I think that's really one of the biggest problems with the draft, that a team, you can't lay the groundwork for a trade that happens a few days later. You don't have July 1st coming up right after it. There are a whole host of problems, but to me, that's the biggest one, that a team is not sure how to evaluate itself because they haven't finished the season.
Mollie, I mean, anything to add to that?
Well, I'm just thinking about the JG Pajot trade. Three picks, third rounder is a conditional in 2022, right? So, but it was contingent on the Islanders winning the Stanley Cup this season. So even if, let's say, hypothetically, they do, I guess, restart in the playoffs and the Islanders are in and they go on to win the Stanley Cup, there's still an asterisk next to the season.
Right.
So does it still apply? I've actually been thinking about this one for like since everything happened. This is like, because obviously I wrote so much about it that I'm just like, what is going to happen to that third round pick?
It's an interesting question. I mean, even just the idea of, all right, the asterisk of what happens if the season restarts or they decide not to they expand the playoffs or whatever the case may be to kind of just get the ball rolling here. I mean, if you're a fan of the team, I'm sure they'll take the championship. I'm sure they'll love it and they'll appreciate it, especially, let's say, it's the Islanders, like Mollie hinted. Islander fans would take that in a heartbeat.
Oh, yes. But there's an asterisk.
Right. But does that matter? I mean, for the players too, what's the impact, Joe? I mean, if you're a player, if you're a management, how much does that weigh into even just the conversation of getting the season going or having to expand the playoffs just to kind of get to that point?
I mean, really kind of going back to what we were talking about that drive and that need to play. I mean, if, the NHL comes to them and says, hey, listen, we're going to start the season in August and we're going to go to a 2014 playoff and it's going to be a best of three and, you got to play around the ice capades, they're going to do it. I mean, it's really, they're going to take what they can get, and there's really no diminishing a Stanley Cup unless you actually don't play the games. Then it's a completely different. These players and these fans this year, especially kind of how the feeling of being pent up is reigning supreme lately. They'll take whatever they can get. So I really don't think there's anything that would dampen just the possibility of hockey coming back. As long as everybody's safe and healthy. But yeah.
Yeah, obviously that's going to be the biggest thing, especially evaluating things going forward. But again, with the off-season scenario, there's been some chatter of maybe the idea of compliance buyouts coming back. Your team gets 1 or 2 compliance buyouts, kind of like what you had with the 2013 lockout season, Scott. And if you're the Islanders and Rangers, that certainly presents an interesting opportunity. If that's the scenario, who would you imagine? I mean, I could figure out who the Islanders would use, but I'll give you a chance to answer that. But if you're the Islanders and Rangers, who do you kind of look at and say, this is a guy that would be on my short list to use that buyout on?
Yeah, the Rangers probably wish they had that buyout a year earlier. They actually don't have a ton of candidates with a bunch of expiring contracts. But, I think that's a strong possibility that Lundqvist could top that list. If you really want to be drastic, it could be Trouba just to get out of that $8 million. That would be like a very loud move by the Rangers.
It would, for sure.
Good adjective.
For the Islanders, it's pretty simple between Ladd and Boychuk, I think. If you get 1 or 2, like it's going to be those guys.
Yeah.
And that's nothing against them. It's just contract related. But for the Rangers, they don't have a lot of long-term commitments. Like, they're not going to cut Panarin. Kreider they just signed, although that might have been a mistake. But they're not gonna give that up. So like they don't have a lot of options. So it's pretty simple that for them it creates some tricky situations there. Mark Stahl and Brendan Smith's contract expire at the end of next season. So yeah, I think like I would probably put Lundqvist at the top of the list with Trouba not a far second, which would be kind of crazy as I'm saying it, but I'm looking at their roster and I'm not sure who else you would use it on.
Molly and Joe, I'll give you a chance to answer that, but I do want to just follow up, Scott. It's a conversation we had, I think, when the Kreider deal was signed, that deadline day. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you follow the Rangers pretty closely along with the rest of us, but I think I remember you kind of having a feeling of maybe it wasn't the greatest signing by the New York Rangers and the impact that it could have going forward on the team.
I wasn't in the room with Jeff Gordon as he was trying to make these trade negotiations, but I think the answer is that they didn't get an offer that was good enough, right? They got him at a manageable number. 6.5 was a very good number to sign him up to for this at this juncture, but they didn't get the big offer to trade him. So if they didn't get the big offer, it's not the worst deal in the world. You just committed to him for 7 more years at 6.5. Now, he's in incredible shape, and as I've said for years, he's probably one of the fastest players in the NHL that no one gives him credit for. In the 2014 Rangers, I would have loved to see Kreider and Hagelin just race because I really think Kreider would have won. But yeah, it's not the worst deal in the world. He's a good player. He's obviously a top 6 player. How he declines in the later stages of his 30s will be interesting, but He is in phenomenal shape, so that he has that working for him. But yeah, would it be interesting if you thought to buy him out to get out of that long-term commitment? Like, you have to think about the future here, and you get a chance to reset rather than kind of hit pause.
And just one more, someone was asking in the chat, how long do you think before Kreider's contract would be in that conversation for a buyout?
It's going to be a few years. As I said, he's in excellent shape. I mean, he kind of invented this whole jumping out of a pool thing while many people struggle to get out of a pool in general. But yeah, I mean, he's got 4 years of 25 plus goal seasons and top 6 minutes and a force in front of the net. And, at least till you have that conversation. And I kind of think he would find a way to be productive towards the tail end of his career, maybe not in the same way, but still a productive player.
All right, Molly and Joe, I'll give you a chance now to answer the compliance buyout thought. I mean, if it was me, I'm assuming the Islanders, I'm going to assume you're both going to say Andrew Ladd is the Islanders candidate for, but I'll give you that chance. But for the Rangers too, Molly, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the options that they have?
For the Rangers, I'm going to have to agree with Scott and say Hank is at the top of it because honestly, in my opinion, the only 2 ways that I see Henrik's career coming to an end is either retirement or a buyout. So it hurts me to say it, but I do think that I would, especially if they got this, special circumstance, I think they would utilize it on him. But and I too would say Ladd for the Islanders, but my note with that is that I felt like toward the end, before everything went on pause, the coaching staff had announced that Ladd was staying up for good. And I think that they were giving him a shot to prove himself. So think about how that affects him.
Right.
He didn't get that chance, so he might be casualty for that.
Certainly an interesting scenario there. Yeah, Andrew Ladd is continuously the something that people remember, and obviously he's a guy that, you know, good locker room guy, and a guy that his teammates appreciate, but obviously someone that the fans have kind of had a unique relationship, I guess you could say, with the way he's played for the organization and the contract that he has. Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, for the Rangers, it was those first two names that kind of popped up in my mind when you asked. It was Lundqvist and Stahl. Really, you know, as much as kind of shedding the contracts, but also just kind of accelerating the youth movement. We know the kids are coming in. We know they're going to play. And we know that this rebuild is accelerating a lot faster than any of us thought it would. So, you know, kind of put it into overdrive, and yeah, you know, it might be a tough move, but it also might be the most logical, unfortunately, which is going to upset a lot of people. But for the Islanders, obviously we talked about Ladd. Another name that I kind of thought of was Leo Komarov. 2 years left on his deal, $3 million cap hit. The Islanders have an abundance of lower line forwards, and he's expendable at this point. So that's just one option to. You know, the Islanders are going to try and tinker with their forward lines here whenever the offseason comes, and however free agency plays out, we won't know until we actually get there. But you know, it's somewhere you'd like to think Lou Lamoriello's taking notes, and you know, time to kind of take away from the position of depth and start addressing other areas.
Well, I'm sure Lou is paying close attention to this this stream tonight. But I mean, just the amazing thing here in this conversation, we obviously talked about Henrik a lot at the top of the program. But I mean, the fact that we're genuinely having a conversation about Henrik Lundqvist being a buyout candidate, a compliance buyout candidate for the New York Rangers, I think is maybe the most fascinating thing the kind of that we've seen kind of play out, even with the situation that the Rangers have had with their goaltender and how this was going to be handled during the course of the regular season. It's amazing to me that Henrik Lundqvist, the king of New York, he's the franchise goaltender. He's got them to a Stanley Cup final. He's won them countless rounds in the playoffs. I mean, he's as big a New York sports star in the sport of hockey as you can get. And it's fascinating that this is even a conversation that is a realistic conversation that you can have at this point.
Yeah, Christian, if I could just jump in, like, were you not around when Derek Jeter left the Yankees or when his stars left? I mean, like, I get it's emotional and he's been a bedrock of the franchise, but like,
right.
This is not the first time we've seen this.
No, I understand that. I understand. I just meant from a hockey sense. Yeah. I just meant from a standpoint of hockey, and when it's hockey, I feel like it's such a different breed than the other sports. And I maybe that's not as true as maybe I'm as naive as Zuccarello and some other people who thought this, but that was always my feeling. And again, it's kind of a unique situation, I thought, from the sense of a hockey standpoint in the sport of New York. And granted, I'm sure it's happened before and it has happened before. It's just fascinating to actually see it play out before your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, Ray Bourque did not leave the Bruins, and Wayne Gretzky stayed with the Oilers. Like, it happens everywhere, though, and I think it just, it's weird going through it, but like, it's not a crazy thought here. And I see what you're saying, but
yeah,
maybe I'm just like too blunt about it. But like, this is, a familiar story.
Joe, you wanted to say something there?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'm just coming from the other side of it because I think I've realized that I'm the top half of the, glass half full kind of guy compared to Scott here.
Yeah.
Kind of going off what you're saying, Christian, when you look at the big four major sports, there seems to be, and again, this is more of an assumption or speculation more than anything, but you tend to kind of see the franchise players, for the most part, spend most of their years with the same team, where it's not this kind of unceremonious ending where, okay, if you're in your lean years, well, we'll give you the option to trade you to a contender. It's not like, let's say, for example, the Brooklyn Dodgers trading Jackie Robinson to the New York Giants, after 10 years and 6 pennants and stuff like that. It's not like such a shrewd move, but this talk of Lundqvist kind of has that feeling of ruthlessness in a way. And obviously there have been cases like that, but when you talk about a star of his caliber, you think he's kind of, you know, not not worthy or you know, like he doesn't deserve it. But you know, it is what it is.
Certainly, certainly, and I think Joe kind of captured the sentiment I was getting at anyway. Obviously, Scott, being the pessimist that he is, had to kind of jump in there. Nice Brooklyn Dodgers reference. Jeez, Joe, I can't think of too many 20-something-year-olds who would make a Brooklyn Dodgers Jackie Robinson reference here.
I'm here. That's it.
All right, I'll give you guys each an opportunity to answer this. Start with Mollie. You said you're not really a betting woman, but all right, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. You have to make a definitive guess here, I guess you could say. Does the NHL season start in July? And what's the format we end up seeing here?
What's the format of it?
Yeah.
I really, if I'm gonna be a betting woman, I say nothing comes back.
Wow.
For a long time. I really do. Because I think, like we said before, I think that they're going to sit down, have a million meetings, put every which way scenario they possibly can together, maybe even start working on one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's going to say, if someone tests positive, this is all for nothing.
Right.
What is it for? So I feel like until the state of the world is figured out, literally the state of the world, until it is under control, it's trivial to think that sports could come back. It's just, I don't see it happening.
All right, Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot here next. Joe, I'll give you a little time to think this out. Scott, your thought?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind, it's almost like unfathomable where the world will be in 30 days, 60 days. Like, I think part of the reason why we can't see a solution is because we can't figure out how it would possibly happen. So I think something could happen whenever that does happen, things could move really quickly. But I think the finances of the NHL, like, I don't think they're coming back this calendar year. I really don't. And I think the NFL will be the first sport to start because they make enough money in television that it makes sense. The NBA could do something similar. But I think right now, as it stands, we're looking at, like, I'm hoping next season runs semi-smoothly at this point.
Joe, you've had a few minutes to give it a thought. Your answer to the question.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Mollie and Scott here. If I was a betting man, I would bet that I wouldn't see hockey this year, as much as I would love to see the league kind of coming back to an expanded playoff, and it's a mad dash to the Stanley Cup. That would be amazing, and interest would be as high as it's ever been. But really, you're not going to see, at least in my opinion, you're not going to see one of the major pro sports as the first sporting organization to come back.
Okay.
You're almost going to see golf and horse racing and tennis kind of be the guinea pigs. And if it's sustainable, if they can find a way, because we know golf's schedule is loaded in the fall.
Right.
Horse racing is talking about coming back really soon. The U.S. Open tennis still hasn't been canceled yet for late August. So I think everybody's kind of playing that wait and see mentality. Again, this is pure speculation, but really that's kind of all that we're able to do at this point, which I don't like, but it's the reality of things.
Joe, the one sport you left off there, and I think a lot of people are going to be angry at you, is NASCAR.
Gee, I should have remembered.
NASCAR also one of those sports. People are going to become big NASCAR fans if that's one of the first things to come back. I mean, watching a car go around the track 200 times in a left circle, nothing gets more exhilarating than that. But I did want to get to some, later questions. Obviously, we've all, covered games. We've all done it for, a number of years now, I'd imagine. We're all relatively on the younger side, Brian Compton and Andrew Gross and Arthur Staple have been covering the game for a very long time, and they have a lot of memories and stuff. But I wanted to kind of ask you guys what some of your better or most memorable moments covering an Islander or Ranger. I'll even open it up to all sports at this point.
Oh man.
Any kind of sport. What's been one of the most memorable events that you guys have been able to cover in your professional careers? And Scott, I'll start with you first, since I want to give you the chance to answer that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot up there. One that really stands out to me is the Stadium Series at Yankee Stadium.
Yes.
Not the game days, actually, the practice days
Hmm.
were phenomenal. And to see, it was a totally different scene to see Josh Bailey with this kid on the ice and, Nabokov's family in the locker room. Just, it was such a different dynamic, and the players were in a different mode. It was really special to see, and it was really like a cool culmination of how much of a family hockey is, incorporating all their
Right.
family. That was a really special day. I was a little bummed that I missed the Rangers practice because I went to the Islanders game where versus Pittsburgh, where Vanek kicked it in overtime and said if he played on Pittsburgh, that would have counted. So that was at least a little fun. But like
Right.
the practice at Yankee Stadium was really pretty special.
Yeah, that Ranger practice, that was the day the Devils and Rangers practiced at Yankee
Yeah.
Stadium, and it was snowing. I mean, it was as picturesque as you could ask for during a practice day. And I mean, the one thing, because Scott and I both covered that series, those state outdoor games at Yankee Stadium, was that the second game, the Islander Ranger game, was obviously not the better of the two that happened, but also it was the coldest night that you could have imagined. And the most memorable part for me from that was I had a cold that I most likely caught from covering the practices the day before, and I was what felt like deathly ill trying to cover this game and sitting in the press conference room shaking from how terrible I felt. But Joe, give you a chance to answer here. You've obviously covered a bunch of different things for some various outlets, and is there anything in particular that jumps out?
Yeah, I'll keep it hockey here.
Sure.
I had the pleasure of covering the 2018 Winter Classic between the Rangers and the Sabres at Citi Field. That was just a surreal experience on New Year's Day. Again, incredibly cold. Thank goodness Citi Field had that nice and close press box, so I was kind of staying toasty and sipping on hot cocoa. So I was really living the dream. But I felt bad for everybody else out there. But again, it was awesome game. The atmosphere was incredible. Certainly felt like a once in a lifetime deal. Hopefully, it comes back soon. And obviously, the other thing that stands out for me was games 1 and 2 at the Coliseum last year, first round, Islanders Penguins. That was just, it was a madhouse. It was, sometimes you kind of feared for your life a little bit at times. And game 1, we obviously know how the press box is at the Coliseum. So there was so much press there that they said, you have to work in the workroom. And who wants to watch the game on TV from the basement of the Coliseum when you're in the building? So I stood out on the concourse for the entire game. And, there was some dodging and ducking and weaving and praying that you didn't get hurt. But really, it was just, I'd like to think that was as pure of a hockey watching experience or atmosphere as you can find. It was just incredible.
Yeah, there really is nothing quite like a playoff game at Nassau Coliseum. Mollie, what about you? What sticks out when you think of events that you've covered professionally?
Well, I graduated from college in May, so
I'll also give you I knew that coming forward, so I'll give you the opportunity to include your coverage of I forget which school in Boston.
UMass.
Your
Close,
UMass
close.
hockey coverage.
Yeah, obviously that for me, covering UMass in the national championship, anybody that knows me, it was the greatest experience of my life. But I've been on the job since June, so I do have a couple of favorites. But I would say probably when I first started, my favorite was the U.S. Open, which I forget who mentioned it, but that hasn't been canceled yet, and I am praying. I'm just praying because that was my favorite event to cover. I've always been a huge fan of the tennis stars, the Serena and Venus Williams and Roger Federer, and all those guys are they're great. they're awesome. So that was super fun. And I would probably say for hockey, I covered 3 of the 4 Rangers Islanders games this season. So that was so much fun for me, especially because my mom, huge Ranger fan, and she grew up in high school during the 80s. So she said that Islander fans used to hit her into her locker and stuff. And they would just torture her every time they won the Stanley Cup. So me walking out the door to go cover the Ranger Islander games was a pretty cool experience for both of us. So that would definitely be probably my favorite of the hockey season.
Yeah, I mean, this season there was the Islander Ranger series being back at Nassau Coliseum was kind of a nice twist too.
Oh yeah.
Kind of bringing back some of that old feeling. I remember 2015 is really when, at least for me, when I've been covering the Islanders, that was kind of the best time when you had some of those Islander Ranger games, because you had some really, really good Islander Ranger games that year,
Oh, yeah.
with certain implications. So that was pretty cool. Actually, some of the things that I remember most, as far as covering games, obviously the playoffs always stand out. I mean, it's not the last year's playoff series was really great, but the first one that I covered, the 2013 Islanders Penguins series, which Scott was also there for, if I'm not mistaken, and certainly a quite the raucous atmosphere at Nassau Coliseum. And even one of the other ones that stands out as a Ranger one. I was there when the Rangers clinched the Eastern Conference Championship in 2014. It was right, Scott, if I'm not mistaken.
14 versus Montreal.
And that was a pretty unique situation to be at. And I think that was also the year, Scott. I think when the story, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2014 when they traded for Martin St. Louis, and we were actually in the locker room when Cam Talbot, who was still on the New York Rangers as the backup, if I'm not mistaken, found out from one of the other reporters in the locker room that the trade had actually gone through, and that proceeded. And then all of a sudden, the Rangers had closed their locker room pretty quickly. So that memory's always stood out.
That's accurate.
Yeah, that memory's always stood out too as one of the more kind of unique ones, and kind of one of those behind the scene moments. That's pretty cool. But I mean, for you guys, is there a behind the scenes moment? Obviously, we always remember the games that we cover when they're very entertaining, but like some of the minor details of that people don't necessarily know we get to do, talking to players or an interaction with, player or coach, or, even just another reporter or something like that. Is there any moments for you guys that kind of stand out like that, where you kind of always put that in the back of your mind? You're like, wow, that's such a cool thing that maybe if you're not in the profession, you don't think is as cool, but still it's, kind of that kind of cool retrospective to have, Scott.
There was one game that really stands out to me. It was game, to be pretty specific, Game 6 in the 2015 playoffs, the Rangers versus Capitals. I was down in DC for that. The third period was all Capitals, and Lundqvist was essentially standing on his head. But there was a shift in the press box where a bunch of us were on the Rangers on the Capitals goal side, and about 10 of us walked down to the other side of the press box because all the action was in the Rangers defense. And to see that unfold, the way the game was, they eventually came back from a 3-1 series, but we all just, like, I think it must have been 10 or 12 people that just stood on the other side of the press box because that's where everything was, and there was no need to be in the other side of the room. It was pretty weird to see, and pretty special, I thought.
That's great. Joe, what about you?
Well, there's a couple of memories that kind of come to mind. I was in my senior year of college, and I was interning at Newsday, and I was running quotes for Mr. Arthur Staple prior to Game 3 of the 2013 playoffs between the Islanders and Penguins. So it was really one of the first times I was kind of let loose alone in a locker room by myself. So I was pretty nervous, and you go into the Penguins locker room, and at the time, Jerome McGinley was on the team, and obviously Marc-Andre Fleury was on the team, and we had just finished the scrum with Evgeny Malkin, and we're kind of hanging around, and I'm by myself. I really don't know anybody. And, I kind of hear behind me, two guys getting into it. They're kind of raising their voices, and you don't want to stop and stare, and they're kind of arguing, and I hear somebody kind of go, well, what do you think? And nobody's kind of saying anything, so I turn around, and sure enough, it's Marc-Andre Fleury, and he's debating with Jerome McGinley on who would win in a fight, the Flash or the Green Lantern. So obviously I'm on the spot. In a panic, I said the Flash, which is what Marc-Andre Fleury picked. And I guess Jerome McGinley, I really never saw him again, but I feel like he does not like me at all forever.
Yeah, he's holding a grudge.
What was that?
He's holding a grudge over that you didn't take his side.
I mean, he probably couldn't pick me out of a lineup if he wanted to, but that and interviewing John Cooper, and we kind of had a conversation about Hofstra. That's where he went to school, and that's where I went to school. And after I ran a little feature on him, we're all done, and he goes, "Hey, is McKeeb still open?" And one of the floors on Hempstead Turnpike, if you don't know the area where a lot of underage drinking happens.
Not that Joe would ever take part.
No, not that I ever did. But yeah, we kind of had a nice conversation about McKeeds of all things in the bowels of Nassau Coliseum. So that was a nice little fun moment too.
Actually, Joe, that practice, if I'm not mistaken, was also the first time I that we met. Was that playoff series between the Islanders and Penguins?
I think you're right.
I know I'm
that
right.
sounds pretty good.
I know I'm right. And Molly, what about you? Is there anything that
I would probably say my funniest behind the scene moment, unfortunately, didn't happen in a hockey locker room.
Okay.
It actually happened over at Citi Field in the Mets locker room. I was writing an early story. So for anybody that doesn't work at a paper, when you have an early to write, it's like for the first edition of the paper. So it has to be in like 2 hours before game time. So, the Mets opened their locker room during batting practice and stuff. So I had approached Robinson Cano because I wanted to write a story on him. And, obviously Robinson Cano has a rep, and I was very nervous. I was maybe like a month and a half onto the job. And I walked out to him and I introduced myself and I was like, "Do you have a second?" He was like, "No." And I was like, well, I really, really wanted to write about him. My story idea was, I just really wanted to run with it. So whatever. So I said, okay, so not right now. And he was like, no. And I was like, well, are you going to come back? And he was like, yeah, maybe. And he was like, meet me out on the field. So I was like, okay. So he walks out of the locker room and all the other writers are like, he's not coming back. Like, pick another story. It's not happening. So I was like, okay. So I walked out into the field and I was like, I'm getting this story. So I planted myself like kind of on the dirt. Like, I kept my eyes on him the whole time. And I just was waiting for him. And I guess while I was waiting for him, they were playing music and stuff. And I guess subconsciously I just started dancing like on the sidelines, I guess, like tapping my feet, like, batting practice is like, it just takes so long. So
Right.
I'm just kind of, tapping my feet, waiting for whatever. So I guess he must have been watching me, because he comes off the field finally after warming up and he's like, all right, come with me. So he like motions for me and I'm following him and all the other writers are watching me and I'm like, like, you said I wasn't going to get it. Here I am. And so whatever, he leads me into the hallway for a one-on-one conversation. And before we start, he was like, so I saw you dancing to me. It was Mi Gente. And I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I love that song. But I'm like, oh my God, like what was I looking like on the side of the field, to make Robinson Cano comment on what I was doing, So then we had like a 2-minute conversation about Mi Gente and how there's a Beyonce version and not a Beyonce version. And, it was great. And I'm like, I'm talking to Robinson Cano right now. So, and then he gave me an awesome interview. It was
Right.
like 10 minutes, answered every question I asked him. And then at the end, he asked me for my name. And I told him. And from then on, every time he sees me, Mollie, 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 does a little dance. And I'm like, hey.
He will never forget you, if anything else.
Nope, guess not. I guess not.
That actually reminds me of a story that Scott and I both experienced this, because it was the same Islanders player. It was Matt Martin a couple years ago after an Islander Ranger game. Maybe it was a game, 2 games before that. It was another writer who wrote something about a play, and it was what he thought looked like a potentially dirty hit. And Martin didn't necessarily appreciate the comment. And so he was actually asking everyone that talked to him, did you see the story? Did you think it was dirty hit? Like we had like a 2-minute conversation. I asked him nothing about it. I was asking about the game. I was asking about this. I was, ready to walk away. I go, Matt, thanks as always for the time. He's like, no problem. Did you see the story? It's this guy wrote that it was a high hit. I'm like, Matt, I didn't see it. And he put me on the spot for like a minute trying to get me to say, that he didn't think it was a dirty hit or anything like that. But those stories are always entertaining, because the stuff that people don't necessarily get to see, but always the stuff that we as sports writers kind of get this kind of special kind of access and kind of scenarios that no one would ever imagine they'd be in. But I want to give you guys, before we wrap it up, you guys have been really generous with your time, so I really do appreciate all 3 of you coming on and doing this. But I do want to give you a quick opportunity to kind of give us an inside peek of what your quarantine has been like. Everyone's kind of in quarantine, the same, quarantining a little differently. Obviously, a lot of Netflix, Hulu, streaming, and eating, I would imagine, because I know that's been the case with me. But again, I'll start with the Joe here. Joe, what's been your quarantine go-to on Netflix, and what do you what's your snack of choice now? Because we really have nothing else to do but eat and watch Netflix.
Yeah. When I'm not working, and thankfully, there's still work to be done.
Right, of course.
I just discovered Community on Netflix.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I'm super late to the party.
Yeah.
It's hilarious though, and I've kind of been looking for something at least kind of funny to lift my spirits, and this has been a nice distraction, I guess. And I'm really not much of a binge watcher. I don't think I have the attention span for it, but I've gotten through a couple seasons in like a month, so that's progress for me. So it's been good. Choice. That's I mean, I'm an outlier here. I like goldfish, but I like the Parmesan goldfish.
Weird.
So that is like my go-to. That is my go-to snack, and I know that makes me sound kind of weird, but I'm here to saddle that reputation, I guess. And, yeah, it's been weird here, just kind of staying home, and my gym consists of adjustable dumbbells on a piano bench, and it's just trying to find a way through. It's been fun.
I can't make fun of you for just jumping on the Community bandwagon either, Joe. I actually just discovered that show myself. So,
Jeez, where have you guys been?
well, I've been going through basically every show on Netflix that like looks semi decent. You go through, you're like, all right, this is not bad. I'll finish it, whatever. And so, Community was the next on the list. So, I've been working my way through the first season or so of that. It's actually pretty funny. I agree with Joe. But Mollie here, what's been your Netflix or Hulu or streaming service of your choice? What have you been watching, and what's the go-to snack?
I just finished Outer Banks, which was like it just had no business being as good as it was, if that makes sense. Like it's only one season, and I don't even know if it's been renewed for a second or what's going on. But at first glance, the characters are all very pretty boy looking, and they're all perfect and almost like obnoxiously perfect. That you're like, but the story, it's about a treasure hunt.
Right. Okay.
So it's really, really interesting, and I blew through it. It was so good. And then I'm also in the middle of Ozark, so making my way through that. A lot of people on that bandwagon. And then my go-to quarantine snack, I would have to say, is the tortilla scoops.
Okay, nice.
Scoops with queso. Oh yeah.
It's a pretty good choice. I can't argue with that. And Scott, your shot here. What have you been watching? What have you and your wife been binging? And what's the go-to snack for you guys over there?
Yeah, so a lot of those shows I've watched actually already, so I feel pretty ahead of the game here. My latest show I've been watching is Fauda on Netflix. I really love spy shows and thrillers, and it's been really captivating. And then my wife and I have been trying to watch Listen to Your Heart, the Bachelor edition, but it's horrible. And I can't.
As a Bachelor fan, nope.
Yeah, as not a Bachelor fan, I'm so that's been that's off my list. But Plot Against America and Bad Education are like next up on my list to watch on HBO.
Bad Education, I actually just watched that the other day. It was good, because the three of us, Joe, Scott, and I, are all from Long Island, so I always find anything that's hometown based very interesting, because there's a lot of weird stuff that happens out here. And I think that was one of those stories that I kind of vaguely remember hearing like a parent talking about long time ago, and seeing in the movie piqued the interest of just finding out what this was. So it was a good watch. It was actually a really good movie. So that was actually the last thing I watched on HBO myself.
Yeah, so those are next up on my list to do. And as for quarantine snacks, microwavable popcorn's been up there because we just have a lot and we have to get rid of it. But as people who are quarantined and not food shopping so often, we don't have many snacks here.
So basically what you can get your hands on.
Basically, yeah.
Interesting. Actually, though, it's so Bad Education, like I said, was the one thing I just watched. The other show that I got to pretty quickly was Too Hot to Handle on Netflix. That was the last.
You
like,
got
Netflix.
through the whole thing?
I got through the whole thing.
Oh,
I
man.
did not.
I got through about 10 minutes, and I was
Too. Me too.
I was not watching that. My fiance was like, "You need to watch this show," and I just politely refused. I love you, hun, but
What about
no.
Love Is Blind?
Yo,
That
show.
was okay. The Too Hot to Handle was just, oh my, I don't even know what they did there. But Love Is Blind was actually somewhat bearable. The characters were at least relatable. The people on Too Hot to Handle were like negative relatable.
I think Too Hot to Handle ruined any chance of me watching Love Is Blind.
I get that it's different and not as like trashy, for lack of a better word.
There are certain shows like, pre-quarantine, like, my fiance just, I love the show. Can you please watch it with me? I was like, yes, I'm trying to be good. I'll do it. You have to watch a game every once in a while. It's the least I can do. But she put on Love Is Blind, and I think it was probably the most entertaining of her shows that I watched just because I hated everybody so much. So that was at least a salvageable program, I guess.
Yeah.
But the Listen to Your Heart is terrible. And honestly, the funniest thing about that is the reason why they created it was because people were coming on the show Bachelor anyway to promote their music. So then they decided to just make a whole show for it. Like too many times, people were getting sent home because they found out that they were just there to promote their music career. So just make it its own show. Done.
Well, I can say that was never on my list of things to watch. Too Hot to Handle was. I thought it was decent until the last episode, which really had no payoff and really disappointed me after watching the entire season up until that point.
Yeah, Christian, we're gonna have to recommend some shows for you.
Yeah. I mean, you guys all kind of have excuses of why you watch that. Joe's engaged.
My mom made me watch Too Hot to Handle. And
Mollie's mom made her watch that.
Yeah.
I'm like, Ma, turn it
off. That's a great show to watch with your mother.
Yeah, right? I was like, Mom, I can't watch this with you right now. I just can't.
You guys got to start recommending some better stuff for me to watch. I just watched Extraction the other day too, which was all right on Netflix. But and they need some better. I don't know Ozark's on the short list.
Yeah, but also as a Disney employee, like you guys should try Disney Plus out.
I'll give it a shot. I started watching Avatar the other day. I'd never seen Avatar, the movie Avatar.
I haven't seen it all the way through too. I don't think
it's all right. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. At the point where I am, I necessarily don't think I'd recommend it. But I do want to end on this note because, like I said, you guys have been really generous with your time. We've all covered hockey as hockey writers or general assignment reporters. What is the one thing that everyone has missed about covering a live game or being at a live game since the season paused in March? Mollie, I'll give you the first chance here to kind of give your answer here.
I miss seeing all my friends that I work with. I miss seeing all the people in the field. I miss all the PR people. I miss talking to the players. I miss walking into a cold rink. I miss shivering in the press box. I'll even say it. Honestly, I would probably say my favorite thing is walking into an arena and just getting smacked in the face with that cold. As much as I hate being cold, I love that feeling. So that's I miss that, and just working with everybody and being in the press box and human interaction. My mother, love you, Mom.
Joe, what about you? What's the biggest thing that you're missing right now?
Yeah, I miss. There's just that one moment where it's a shot from the point, and it's kind of like the equivalent of the moment where a pitch is being delivered, where everything just kind of stops, and it happens 6% of the time if you're lucky. But a shot from the point, and it goes in, and it's just that initial eruption from the crowd, man. And that's what I miss. I miss the crowd. I miss the atmosphere. I miss the vibrance and everything like that. It's just, I miss people, man.
And Scott, what about you?
Yeah, I miss going outside to do something for one. But that feeling, like, we haven't had it a lot lately, but that feeling in an arena when it's like 4:00 and you're just getting ready to get started for the game, and like it's a big game, and you could sense the anticipation building, and you're like waiting for the fans to pile in. Like there's something to that when you're like ready for a big moment. It's really special to be a part of. And covering the Rangers for the past 5 years, there was a lot of that up until a year or two ago. For the Islanders, there's been that too, especially for playoff games. But like, we're at the end of April here. Like we should be gearing up for playoff games, waiting for the shoe to drop, waiting for like the Marchand bad exit interview, or just some action like that. And there's that feeling in an empty arena when it's the anticipation's building is really kind of special and always stands out to me.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer there. I mean, I certainly agree with Scott. I mean, for me, it's just the normalcy of it, like going to a game and sitting there and the emotions of the crowd and even like the terrible games we've covered, because we've all covered really bad games at different points, even this season. Just the being there, and I mean, being able to be angry that you have to sit through this really terrible game is something you miss. You take that like 8-1 game where you just like, why are we still doing this at the second period now? Why don't we just call this game now so everyone can go home? So I agree. It's just, and even that, like Scott was saying, that ability that being in an empty arena, whether it's for baseball, football, basketball, or hockey, there is something really unique to that feeling, in a building that for other people, all they know it is just chaos, people selling things, vendors, fans, noise. There is that feeling of just being there hours before the game and knowing it's a big game, or just knowing that it's, that it's going to be a good afternoon or a good night. And, you certainly miss that feeling of just being there for a little bit. So I think that's the biggest thing for me anyway. But guys, I really, like I said, I really appreciate everyone's time. You guys have been outstanding with and generous with this, so I do appreciate it. Again, Mollie Walker from the New York Post. I do have your Twitter handle up here, and I wrote it down somewhere. It's Mollie with 2 E's Walker with 2 R's at the end on Twitter. So you made that super complicated for me to read it on here. Joe, again from AM New York Metro. He's the sports editor there. Joe, you can follow him on Twitter at Joe Pantorno, and Scott Charles, who's written for the Associated Press, Pro Hockey Talk. He's been a colleague of mine in Islanders Insight. He's also a product of the Alan Crater School of Journalism as well, like myself and Mollie. You can follow him on Twitter as well. He's at Scott M. Charles on Twitter. So, guys, again, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And it's been great getting to catch up with you and great chatting with you guys.
Likewise.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, Christian.
Thanks, Christian.
All right, we are off the stream. I'm going to stop the recording.